From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Thanks so much for coming out tonight. What a lovely crowd here on a wonderfully lovely day suddenly in the Capitol. My name is Rob Casper. I'm the head of the Poetry and Literature Center here at the Library of Congress, and I am so pleased to introduce tonight's event featuring our new Witter Bynner Fellows. This marks the 18th year of the fellowship, in which the library's poet laureate, consultant in poetry, selects two poets to organize a reading in their hometown and home state in conjunction with our Center for the Book, and to travel here to DC to participate in a reading and a recording session, which took place earlier today. Before we begin, let's have everybody do what I'm going to do, which is to turn off your electronic devices, as they can easily enough interfere with the sound for the event. So the aim of the Witter Bynner Fellowships is to encourage poets and poetry and the work of the previous 20 fellows, among them MacArthur Genius Fellow Heather McHugh, Pulitzer Prize winner Claudia Emerson, National Book Award winner Mary Zebist, and Academy of American Poets Chancellor Carl Phillips, has provided an essential contribution to the art. Our two new fellows, Emily Fragos and Bobby C. Rogers, are a wonderful addition to the history of the fellowship. We look forward to celebrating their work tonight with you and supporting their future work through this honor. We are also happy you will get a chance to hear them tonight, and I want you to know that we have books by both fellows right in the back over there for sale. And we'll have a reception after this reading and after the awarding of the fellowships, all in this room. So it'll be easy to get some food, buy a book, get a signature, and help us honor our fellows. I also want to take the opportunity to thank the Witter Bynner Foundation for Poetry, which has supported this fellowship from its onset. The fellowship was founded in Santa Fe, the foundation was founded in Santa Fe, New Mexico in 1972 through a bequest by the acclaimed author and translator, and you'll hear a little bit about Mr. Bynner shortly. And its aim is to promote poetry and American culture. To that end, it offers grants ranging from $1,000 to $10,000, which is the amount of the fellowship, in support of individual poets, poetry translation, and the process of translation. We owe a special debt of gratitude to the Foundation's Executive Director, Stephen Schwartz, who could not be here with us tonight, unfortunately, but who is tireless in his efforts to champion both the fellowship and its many recipients. I'm honored to say that tonight we are joined by the Librarian of Congress, James H. Billington, and hopefully soon his wife, Marjorie. Dr. Billington has many duties as the Librarian of Congress, among them the appointment of the Poet Laureate Consultant in Poetry, a duty established by an act of Congress in 1985. In discussing his appointment of Charles Wright last year, the librarian told the New York Times that he was won over by Wright's, quote, combination of literary elegance and genuine humility. It's just the rare alchemy of a great poet, end quote. Charles has embodied these traits throughout his laureateship, from his wonderful opening reading to hundreds in September in the Coolidge Auditorium to his selection of these Witter Bynner Fellows. To introduce each of the fellows tonight, please join me in welcoming our 20th Poet Laureate, Charles Wright.
Thank you. Save your applause for the people who deserve it. I was going to say a lot of the stuff that Rob did about the 18th year and so on and so forth of the fellows, but I did want to say a little something about Witter Bynner himself. It's something you all probably already all know. He was a poet, primarily, an essayist, and a translator. And he's most well known for his translations from the Chinese, of which he spoke not one word. But he had a very good friend, a Chinese scholar whom he met at Berkeley when they were both teaching there back in the early 20s. And they put together from a Chinese anthology called 300 Poems of the Tang, which was put together in the 1700s. They put together the Jade Mountain, which is really Mr. Bynner's best-known monument, really. And all of us who have an interest in Chinese poetry, or just poetry in itself, I think have read it. I certainly have. In fact, I've even written parts of it since then. But that's who he was, and that's who these fellowships honor. So let's get on to the business at hand, which I guess I should start out with a full disclosure here. Bobby C. Rogers was a student in several of my graduate classes at the University of Virginia some years ago. Everybody seems to get a little edgy when a teacher does something for a former student, including myself. I get edgy. But it's always the superior ones who get a nudge. And Bobby was the superior one, and that was a long time ago. You know. He's a southern country boy from Tennessee, and the fact that I used to be the same thing, of course, has nothing to do with anything but the beauty and significance of his poems. They are rooted in memory and place in the darkness and light of those two things. His poems have a wisdom to them that continually surprises me, though I don't know why it should. If Faulkner was right, and I think he was, about the past never being past and still not being over yet, then Bob's poems bring that certainty sharply into focus. He is a storyteller, an acute and distinctly present storyteller, something I've never been able to do, so naturally I admire the britches off anyone who can. His long, tactile and subject and object-studded lines have move inexorably down the page to their appointed ends. I need new glasses. It's all blurred. It's all coming over me at the same time. I can't believe it. Let's see, where was I? His book, Paper Anniversary, seems to say with each poem, "Come unto me, all you who are empty and vacant of history and your place in it, and I will fill you up with mine, which is yours too, and you shall be full." It has filled me with admiration and jealousy over the years as I've followed the poems coming together. This is an often dazzling, always high-minded and right-minded enterprise. His use of domestic value, his emphasis on things to carry this story have the fingerprints of mystic sensibility all over them. Whether painting a room, revisiting his family farm, recalling the old roads, running into a former poet friend who tells him that he's stopped writing, the humanity and nostalgia that is in these poems seep into our own lives, and if we let them, fills us up. Bobby C. Rogers is a professor of English at Union University in Jackson, Tennessee, and lives in Memphis. His second book will be published this spring, a painstaking and immaculate craftsman. You know it's going to be great. One of the few tangible results of teaching is seeing what you thought would happen. And Bobby has been spectacular. Please welcome him.
Oh, it's an honor to be here at this library. It's an honor to be named a Witter Bynner Fellow. It's an even greater honor to be introduced by Charles Wright, a poet I've admired since it occurred to me to start admiring poets. I'm going to begin by reading you a Charles Wright poem. This is my 20 minutes. My daughter takes her piano lessons at the community music school at the University of Memphis, and we usually have some time to kill beforehand. So we kill it in the Ned Ray McWhorter Library. Our favorite table is in front of the windows in the bound periodicals section. Only a couple of people know that library maybe. And while she's doing the algebra homework that I can't help her with, it's actually pre-algebra, I'll take down a volume of Kayak. Do you remember that lovely journal from the 1960s? It's full of vibrant early work from several poets laureate. Here's a Charles Wright poem from 1967. Birthday Song. Today I'm 31. Beneath my window voices like plump birds rise, wistful, almost imaginary, into the warm levels of a dying afternoon. Out on the bay, folk boats cluster like bees in the stretches of water. Their sails are lungs which slacken and fill, slacken and fill. Over the beaches, the shadows of gulls slither like startled crabs into the surf where they break into edges, resemble the loose connections starting to drift now like cold seeds just under my skin. Maybe that poem will serve as an epigraph for my reading. Like most things with epigraphs, the epigraph is much more profound than the thing. Jerry Lee Lewis plays that lucky old son at Bad Bob's Vapors Club, Memphis, Tennessee. I'll tell it if you let me. My story of those nights we spent watching the killer play a smoky room down on Brooks Road, almost to state line. Can't you hear the note of reverence in my voice, the sweet pity of tragedy? Even when he wasn't half trying, the songs fell from his lips so sorrow-encrusted and smoldering, so flavorful I'd swear they'd been basketed from the roiling grease of a deep fryer. His offhand rendering of that lucky old son, owing nothing to Ray Charles and everything. Show me that river. Take me across. There was an inwardness to how he spoke the song, owning the piece for just that moment. His leaning over to tell the microphone what he had to tell it, so personal an act we were almost shamed by our fascination. The song's a prayer, another brief hymn to the emptiness inside us and what we hope might come to fill it. On the piano, a cigar was cocked and cold in the ashtray, waiting to be relit when the song was done. Just a night of sightseeing, September 1988. Gone slumming to hear the great and forgotten. None of us quite young enough to be young anymore. The Vapors Club was exactly what you're imagining. Show starts at 10, $5 cover at the door. The gray-blue light, where there was light, had grown so stale and clouded, it seemed to have clabbered, and even the shadows in the shadowy room were bowed with the weight of something I didn't have a name for. The regulars bore it like soldiers, paying customers flammable with hairspray and spent chances, slickened with a whiskey glow, tin-high bourbon redistilled through their pores, sugary and volatile. Everyone in the place had 20 years and a marriage or two on me. They'd lost something time took. The edges of experience as fine and full of meaning as the cuttings and the grooves of an LP record played too many times on a console stereo in the living room. A diamond stylus harrowing its windy memory from the satiny grooves. I was just learning to love, tallying what cost to lose myself as one long breath into another person, not knowing what would be left of me once I was drawn back into myself. There is a point past which we will never again be able to call ourselves detached. But on that night, it was just music, a man punishing a piano for wanting to keep something clenched in the tension of its iron harp. Just a few hours taking us toward another night's savory fatigue and upending. The insects' pulsed cries measuring what was left of the year's heat. Parking lot gravel crunching underfoot. Then the car bounding over the curb back onto Brooks Road. The bar smells we would wear for a while. Dance sweat and menthol 100s. Hairspray and kiwi shoe polish. Spray-on perfume. Then the driving back to Midtown in our own shabby rooms. The car windows down. Details of the skyline edge-etched to the windshield. Unheavened. Sense-bound. All of us silent and rehearsing. Our arrangements of the night's sharps and flats. Aversions shaped to suit our own dying voices. Tom Andrews is a poet and memoirist Charles and I both had the pleasure of knowing. Everyone who knew him misses him a great deal. Book loaned to Tom Andrews. I'd already found out that one of the secrets to happiness was never loan your books. Seems to me if you go to a poetry reading, you should get at least one of the secrets to happiness. But I loaned it anyway. We were all of us poor and living on ideas, stumbling home late to basement apartments, talking to ourselves. What did we own except books and debt? When the time came, we could move it all in the trunk of a car. Tom knew what a book was worth. He brought it back a week later, seemingly unhandled, just a little looser in the spine. A trade paper edition of The Death of Artemio Cruz required reading for a course in postmodernism we were suffering through. The book's trashed now, boxed up and buried in the garage with 100 other things I can't throw away. When I moved back south, I loaned it again to a girl I'd just met. At some party, I'd said it was the best novel since Absalom, which may have been true, but mostly I was trying to impress her and convince myself, still testing all I'd been told about how the matter of a book is best kept separate from, well, matter. Months later, it turned up on my front steps without comment. The cover torn in two places. The dog-eared pages of self-conscious prose stuck together with dark, rich chocolate. My father was born in 1929 in Beacon Junction, Tennessee, to family sharecroppers. Walker Evans was not there to photograph it, but his childhood played out very close to what James Agee described in that wonderful book, Let Us Now Praise Famous Men. So if you've ever wondered what happened to all the poor, benighted sharecroppers of the American South, well, one of them contracted polio, realized he'd have to find another way to get along in the world. He worked his way through a little Cumberland Presbyterian college, became a teacher and an elementary school principal, and had an ungrateful son who somehow found himself at the Library of Congress reading a poem about the ordeal. This is called Social History. My hands were on the wheel, but no one would have called it driving. That morning, Rube Lacey took me for a ride on his tractor. The boy won't forget this, I heard my father say as he boosted me up to the seat. And the shuddering and racket of the old Case International began to cut a furrow into my memory as sharp as dates in a headstone. We were there to visit the ruins, the shabby places my father had lived during the Depression. I would one day be taught to call it vernacular architecture. Devoid of detail and never intended to survive, a two-room sharecropper's shack tilting eastward, its sawmill siding paint-shorn and gapped. I wasn't surprised by my father's love for Rube Lacey. At 6 years old, I had no theory for anything. It was the last time. Every shred of light would soon enough become a premise to be argued. At the end of the field where the rows of corn stubble dwindled into broom sage and scrub cedar, the abandoned shack still squatted in the weeds, a spindly pin oak volunteer twisting upward through the gray boards of the porch. All of it as salted with story as one of those Walker Evans photographs, but with a soundtrack of wind cry and diesel grind. To me, it was just a day not far from ordinary. The two men going over their silvery memories of my father's family tenanting and deeply in debt on the Lacey farm. The old landlord still owned the place the way he always had, the way our nostalgia owns us and will be paid its share of the truth. Now what surprises me is how something as piecemeal as a pile of drawled-out words can be whipped together into an airy apology to render any bitter thing, any bitter fact, palatable and just. That must have been the reason he brought me that day, to gild the past with a shine like the sweet glaze on a fruit pie. It would be a decade yet before our wars got going in earnest, before I began to stand up and challenge his model of the past with sullen remarks like, "I bet Rube Lacey don't bore his kids with any stories of going to bed hungry. If we have to, we'll burn a swath across Georgia to be the one who writes the history." As he backed the car down the gravel drive, the wind was prying at a section of the shack's tin roof. I would be a long time learning to paper my thin meanings onto every porous wall, seams tight and pattern unbroken. My father didn't glance over, but I couldn't help taking one last look at the pin oak, dormant like everything else that time of year, growing up through the floorboards only a little bit bent. Much of what I know about what it takes to be an artist, Charles Wright taught me. But he's not the only model I've had. This is a poem about another one. Like all poets, I stand on the shoulders of giants. Featured twirler. 8 years old, and her crying could rattle the windows of the empty gym. Again, her mother said. And the girl picked up the baton, sniffed once, and was back in her pose before the rewinding cassette tape's hollow whine crescendoed and snapped to an end. All through that interminable winter, while the same shrill music played over and over, she practiced her baton, which, ball to tip, was almost as long as she was. My father judged me old enough to trust with the keys to the school, so he'd sent me through the spitting sleet to unlock the doors. It was winter inside the gym, too. But I took off my gloves and shot a few baskets while they worked. The cold, just another part of the training. She thumb-tossed the baton towards the lights, spun once, twice, and sometimes it was where she hoped it would be to retrieve from its spinning descent. Already, I wanted to write down everything I saw, but I was unwilling to have any piece of me aired in the words. Were my empty notebook pages a failure of nerve or some simpler fault practice might fix? After I was gone from there for good, my mother called one Saturday afternoon to tell me the hometown girl was twirling on TV. I was living in an apartment with dusty radiators that didn't want to work, waking up while it was still dark to pore over literary magazines with forgotten names and library editions of dead poets' collected letters, hoping someone could show me the right way to suffer. Everyone here is watching her. she said. So I turned on my hand-me-down set and cocked the rabbit ears until I could tell how much of the snow in the picture was snow. She marched down the frozen field, head majorette at the University of Oklahoma, smiling like she'd never been taught what cold could do, though a raw wind pulled at her baton when she flung it, and she was wearing next to nothing. That's how you do it. I'll end with a poem about William Eggleston, who is also from Memphis. If you love photography, you may know his work. Eggleston's 1976 MoMA show supposedly made the world safe for color photography. It's a pleasure to be here, an honor to be here. I'm looking forward to hearing Emily read. William Eggleston. The poem begins with an epigraph from John Sarkowski's introduction to the show guide. To me, it seems that the pictures reproduced here are about the photographer's home, about his place in both important meanings of that word. I'm sure I'm wrong about him, but it's always seemed like slumming to me. Those lovely color photographs, quickly seen shots of broken grave monuments and all manner of sun-scoured refuse, peeling billboards, delicately corroding service station signs, and boxcars parked on the siding, copper-tipped clouds against an indifferent sky. Process prints as lurid as circus posters. I wish they didn't seem so damn familiar. All of life is slumming, even if you don't believe in anything more than method. Take just one shot of each view, but condition your eye to capture countless views. Everyone in Memphis can tell you Eggleston's been barred from the Lamplighter Lounge, one of those beer joints over on Madison. You know the kind of place. 50-cent pool table, Rockola jukebox stuffed with Otis Redding sides, a Pabst Blue Ribbon clock running 15 minutes fast. How is your behavior so bad you can't darken the door of a dive like that? A town as rough as this one should be handled with manners and grace. There's something to look at in the saddest room. Beauty is best when it's accidental. I was brought up to act polite, and maybe I'm too fearful of getting barred from the smoky rooms of Memphis, but it breaks my heart to be shut out of even the shabbiest place. How empty if the only thing left to look at is your own looking in this world, so mysteriously encoded into shape and color, where the tawdriest streetscape is built of parts we've only happened upon and had no hand in making. Look at the assurance of beautiful things, how they pose and preen and covet our looking. Such need is the root of all ugliness. We should seek the repose of the unlooked at, because nothing's ever beautiful that's not in some measure caught unawares. And rust, no matter what else it is red. Thank you so much.
Only Bobby C. Rogers could say he was leaving Charlottesville to go back down south. But I know what he means. One addition to Witter Bynner. I'm going to read you a little 4-line poem of his. Clever of me, I broke it up into 2 things so I could say something before each person. This is called The Garden of the Golden Valley by a poet named Tu Mu. Stories of passion make sweet dust, calm water, grasses unconcerned. At sunset, when birds cry in the wind, petals are falling like a girl's robe long ago. I love that last line. Comes out of nowhere. Speaking of coming out of nowhere, a lot of us know how this works. You're on a committee evaluating books, and they all, after a time, seem to settle into a sea of who cares or, whoa, this is bad. Then unexpectedly, out of the deeps, one rises up that starts speaking to you in language and imagery that you totally understand, like a beautiful, shining fish. And you say to yourself, as Elizabeth Bishop did, rainbow, rainbow, rainbow. And you keep on reading, and you read more, and you read it again and begin to feel there is someone out there who understands or is trying to understand what you have been trying to understand. That is what Emily Fragos' work did to me. There is an absent otherness in her poems that hums to me. I like the straightforwardness of how she writes about unstraightforward things. In every poem, a little message is being sent to those without eyes to see. The poems do seem haunted, and of course, they are haunted by what defines them, that absent otherness that she brings so brilliantly to life from wherever it is hiding. There's some chairs over here. Are there? One is always tempted to read swaths of poems in an introduction to show what one is talking about. I won't do that as it poaches her space. I'll read you a couple of lines from two poems that rung my bell. Rung my bell? Where did that come in from? Yeah, that I liked. Oh. This is from Into Great Silence. It's about young monks. You know. If you go into town, say the orders, you must neither eat nor drink whatever is graciously offered, but rest by the plain wayside stream. Cup your hands, brothers, and drink from the plain wayside stream. Love that. And from the art of the insane, I'm taking my pig Rafi for a walk, with her hooves of long curls like a little girl's mop, or Persian slippers, excellent for flying. We are wind gone. We are kingdom come. The modulation of tone, the beauty of the imagery, the complete command of line and stanza. I wish I'd written them, and perhaps I shall. Emily Fragos lives in New York City and teaches at Columbia and NYU. She has written 2 books, Little Savages and Hostage, and numerous articles on dance and music, and has edited several anthologies, one of them of Emily Dickinson's letters, which I like almost as much as Emily Dickinson's poems, which is really saying something, which might account for the smoothness, elegance, and surprise imagery in her poems. I'm dying to hear them, and I hope you are too. Emily Fragos.
It is a great honor to be reading at the Library of Congress, and a consummate honor to be chosen by Mr. Charles Wright, whom I met for the first time today. Thank you for those incredibly gracious and moving words. Thank you to Rob Casper and Matt, who have been so lovely and considerate, guiding Bobby and I through this wondrous day. People like poems about music, this great abstract art. And I like poems about music too, good poems about music, because they do elicit very strong emotional responses. And I've tried to find words for those responses. Bach fugue. Freeze the horses from their mechanical bolts. Keeps the fire from spreading to the sleeper's floor. The miming dancers in the wings swell to great, begin their sly whisperings, their tired arms around each other's waist. The old woman spoons yellow cake into her celestial tremulous mouth, is capable of putting poor Gloucester's eyes glistening back, catches the jumpers with invisible nets from their sad night bridges, finds all those who have been lost to you. The great chords once struck can never decay. I teach in the creative writing department at Columbia, and one of my most wonderful colleagues was the great poet Mark Strand. And we taught on the same day, and our classrooms were near each other. And I just adored him and his very funny emails and his brilliance and his wit. And of course, he was one of our great poets. Mark passed away in November. And he had this wonderful habit of meeting me after class, and he would hand me poems that he loved. He introduced me to Rodzewicz, the great Polish poet, and the poem In the Middle of Life, wonderful poem. And he introduced me to Inger Christensen, the Danish poet. And one day he came up to me and he said, "I'm going to give you a poem that is just wonderful, and nobody's ever heard of it." And he handed me a poem called A Prayer to Go to Heaven with the Donkeys. And the poet was the French naturalist poet Francis Jammes, Jammes, and I had never heard of it. And it was the most reverential, tender, innocent, pure, sweet poem about these overworked animals. And I said to him, "This is so wondrous, this poem, Mark. It reminds me of For My Cat Jeffrey by Christopher Smart." And I remember that his face lit up and he said, "I'm so happy you said that, because Christopher Smart and I were born on the same day, April 11. And I remember these wonderful conversations I had with my colleague Mark Strand. I've been thinking about him because when you lose a great poet, you feel such an absence. You're kind of bereft. Because great poets like Mark Strand, like Charles Wright, they don't come along every day. It takes so many factors, everything in a life has to come together, it has to work. A lot of luck, a lot of work, a lot of natural gift. And it all has to come together. And so when you lose such a rare phenomenon, really, such as a Mark Strand, it hurts. So I dedicate this poem to my wonderful colleague, Mark Strand, the late Mark Strand. And it is a poem about donkeys. It was inspired by that wonderful poem by Francis Jammes, although it's a very different voice. Beast of Burden. Piled so high the legs buckle, hit with a thin stick, whistled out, shouted out, kicked with their heels. End me on this earth with these humans, under a boiling sun in a world of rocks. Remove the tower of wooden collars studded with bells from round my thick neck, so that removed from all halters I may wander. Let the dust blow me away to long quiet roads, the clip-clop of my feet the only music I hear. Or let me be gently led like the old, or pull the wooden carts of babies and nothing more. Lord of the ass, lay me down unencumbered in your green pastures, for which they incessantly pray, the air cooling and petting the bones of my ears, brushing my skull, the still waters washing out my braying mouth. In recent years, I've become very interested in maybe a handful of artists who are labeled outsider artists. And Judy Scott is one of them, and James Castle is another one. And I thought you might like to see a James Castle drawing. I wrote a poem based on this drawing. I don't know if you can see it. James Castle was a very poor farm boy in Idaho. He was mute and deaf, and he did not know sign language. And he drew with using dirt and saliva, mixing them together to draw. And he used a stick. And this very enigmatic picture. So I thought you would like to see how this generated this poem called Figure with Hat. Face split in two, the stake of black soot and spit running up and down the body. Nothing but the grit it takes to keep going in this life. The lonely pitch, the Christ on his raw wood, the undertaker in his stiff black suit. Earthen as Idaho, mute, Castle scowls. He'll show his drawings to kin across the way, and if they laugh, to hell with them. Nothing to see here, Missy. You're kidding yourself if you think there is. James Castle was known to be a very cantankerous individual. This poem, Hostage, is also the title of my book, and it was inspired by this famous painting by Francisco Goya called The Dog. And an art historian told me, by the way, that everyone wonders, what is the dog who seems to be sinking into the mire? What's he looking at? But an art historian told me in the original drawing, X-rays have revealed little black bird's wings in the upper right-hand corner. So perhaps in the original, Goya had the dog staring at the freedom of the birds flying away. Clearly the dog is trapped there. So this poem was inspired by that masterpiece by Goya. Hostage. God is in the dogs, the one who turns in circles, the one with scabs, the one who wears the collar, who stares and tries in spite of it to smell the dirt and grass. In the abandonment, torrential muteness, my knees loosened, my glassy eyes of crystals warmed, and it was given, even should we sleep, turn, weep, recite, screaming, the city is conquered, and the little king will have to go, insane and unreachable, we are still here. Since I started with a poem about the great Bach fugue, I think I'll also now read a poem about Glenn Gould, a famous pianist who was famous for being a great Bach interpreter, but also a very idiosyncratic character. And it's called Glenn Gould Dead at 50. It is darker where I am. I cannot tell, holding my hand over one eye, if it is female there. At 6, I multiplied endlessly and began to feel close to sacrifice. The music took root inside, like torture, all tension, retard, release. It is in every part of my body now, and there is not room left for me. I have burned all my capes, got rid of my papers. I trained as a pianist and as a cellist, so in playing a lot of these musical scores, a lot of emotions are released, and particularly when you play Scarlatti on the piano, light seems to be released. And I was thinking of that today coming here on the train. I said the world is so sometimes so overwhelming that we need as much light as released as possible. So this is a much lighter poem, a poem about kind of ecstatic release or transcendence, and it's called The Scarlatti Sun, S-U-N. The mute seamstress on her knees sticks a pin in the hem and weeps for the cloth. The dead stop their dying, their heads warming like stones in the Scarlatti sun. The grave postman, his worn leather bag strapped to his back, feels his mind go, windswept. An old woman at her window, her old cat on the sill, sips thick coffee from a saucer. And in the shuttered convent, the novitiate, taken up, rushes across the just washed floor, daring the ground to break a bone. This poem is called After Dürer, and it was inspired by a famous drawing by Albrecht Dürer, Melancholia. Someone told, of course that's a very symbolic drawing, I don't understand all the symbols, but the person, Melancholia, the lady in the drawing, I was told by someone, is not just a negative figure, she was also considered part and parcel of the creative mind. But in this poem, she is melancholy, she is despair. It's called After Dürer. As when icy illness ends, that you never expected could possibly end, and the terrified body, enveloped in warm water, reposes, you could kiss every child on the hand, every leaf in the forest, every stone of the wall. A low moan escapes your mouth. Melancholia, the accompanying spirit, is departing with her ratty wings and crusted eyes, her suitcase of rocks. A shy, small creature steps trembling from the brush. I seem to be reading a lot of poems that are ekphrastic in nature, poems that were inspired by works of art or photographs or paintings. And this is also was inspired by a photograph that I saw on the internet of the Scott expedition to the South Pole in 1912. Although Scott was warned not to take ponies as pack animals to the South Pole, warned multiple times, he didn't listen, and he took them, and of course the whole expedition was a terrible disaster. But I saw photographs that have been recovered of the ponies in the South Pole. And I said, well, how can I honor this this experience, or both the men who perished and these hapless animals? How do you honor this and I decided in the simplest way possible by being spare and minimal. So this is called Ponies at the South Pole, after a photograph, Scott Expedition, 1912. They are quieter than quiet. They are colder than cold can be imagined. They may very well be blind. Their ears receive the last sensation, a tiny crumble of nothing. Their oblong heads tilt toward each other. The end cannot be far, writes the bungling, stubborn man in his battered white tent. Writes suffering, bungling man. Not too long ago, I discovered the poetry of the Swiss writer Robert Walser, and I took to it right away because it was so joyous and so liberating. He was a man who had a very difficult life, and yet his poems speak to a great reverence for life and joy and keen observation, and I was just very taken by it, and I wish that I could be entirely like that myself. So I wrote 2 poems, The Life and the Death of Robert Walser, a wonderful writer. Who believed very much in the power of imagination and creativity as a way of release, as a deep sense of solace, in fact. On Robert Walser. You saw a dwarf and imagined yourself dwarf, or the old homeless hag pushing her cart of junk. You closed your eyes for days at a time, groping along the village walls, tumbling into bushes with an embarrassed gasp. You adored the gentlewoman, her pillowy bum, and the chattering birds with faces like walnuts and feet like twigs, so alive, alert, and active in their birdy pursuits. Standing alone in your stale, furnished room, you felt a shudder of feather, and the glowing air grew full, so close. To be alive was wonderful, but to be small and to stay small, drop of water into the water. Part 2 on Robert Walser. From barracks of pandemonium, from footpaths of solitude, be glad, be gentle and kind, patient. And the asylum aide carrying a lantern, stumbling upon him in the meadow's lit snow, his hat flown from his head, his eyes locked open in doll-like wonder. How unexpected is death? How expected. I think I will read. I wanted to read a dance poem, if I can find it. I happen to love dance. I don't know if I can find it. I don't think I'm going to find it. I should have. I don't know if you like dance as much as I do, but I love the black and white ballets of George Balanchine. And I wrote this poem to Balanchine and his great devotion to the women dancers. And I have another poem that is maybe the only poem ever written for his male dancers, because nobody paid any attention to them. It was mostly all the females, but I'll read you just the to Balanchine. The seraphim spot you, arms splayed, eyes swollen shut, and send the white-robed ship to find you. The walls of wave by their approach nearly drown you. Sad irony for having survived so long a frightening distance from land. Now join your suffering to ours, chime the delirious muses, and make for us the great dance. Mixed beings of air, earth, and water, with voices like wild laughter, whose faces you will never see, so covered are they by wings. And my final poem, I'd like to end on a hopeful note. This is called First Fate. In back alleys and side streets, and along the tracks at night alone or with one other, trudging, on their backs black garbage bags stuffed with filthy towels, a mechanical canary, a small wooden model of a Bavarian castle, biscuit tins, the harp of a lamp. The lumberyard psychic pulls out her sofa bed that kills her back and puts away her teacup and manuscript of astral charts. At the end of this night, you will find the place to lie down and be still at last. Hosts coming alive like trees in a fairy tale to help unpack your belongings. And there will be warm food, a baby asleep in a deep, soft ball, and there will be scratchy music. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks to both of our poets for a terrific reading, and now I'd like to call them back up on the stage. Please, Bobby and Emily. On behalf of the Poet Laureate Consultant in Poetry and the Library of Congress, I would like to award the both of you the 2015 Witter Bynner Fellowship in Poetry. Please join me in congratulating them. There you go. Congratulations. We have a terrific spread in the back. Please get some food and drink and toast the new fellows and buy their books and have them sign. And if you are in New York or in Nashville, Tennessee, come fall, look for their readings affiliated with the Empire Center for the Book and the Tennessee Center for the Book. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.